I moved into this old house just outside of town. It was a steal, too good to pass up, really. The house had character, sure. It was a two-story with a big living room and a second floor that overlooked the backyard. But what made it especially appealing was the unfinished basement. There were rumors that the house had been abandoned for years, that it had belonged to some reclusive old man who died alone. But that didn't matter to me. I was eager to get settled. The first few weeks were uneventful. I spent most of my time unpacking and making the house my own. But one night, while I was sorting through some old boxes in the basement, I noticed something strange. A large rectangular patch of the wooden floor that seemed newer than the rest. It wasn't just the color, it was the way it looked, almost freshly cut, like it had been replaced not long ago. Out of curiosity, I grabbed a crowbar and pried it loose. What I found beneath the floorboards was a small, hidden crawl space, but the air that came out of it smelled wrong, damp, almost musty, with a sharp metallic scent. It was cold down there, colder than the rest of the basement. At first, I thought maybe it was just an old storage area, but something inside me told me to stop. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural whisper, just faint at first, like a murmur from the depths of the earth. I leaned closer to the hole. I could hear something scraping against the walls of the crawl space, almost like fingernails dragging across wood. I backed away, but the whispers grew louder, and then the scraping became more frantic, like something was trying to break through the walls. I ran upstairs, heart pounding, and slammed the basement door shut behind me. I didn't sleep that night. Every little creak in the house made me jump, but the worst part, the whispering didn't stop. It followed me. In the silence of the night, I could hear it. Sometimes it sounded like a voice calling my name, other times like a low growl. The next day, I decided to confront it. I went back into the basement, determined to figure out what was going on. But when I opened the crawl space again, I found nothing. No signs of digging, no nails. The hole had simply vanished. There was no trace it had ever existed. I spent weeks in a state of paranoia, convinced I was losing my mind. But then, the worst part happened. I woke up one night to a muffled sound. It was coming from beneath the floor in my bedroom. I got up and slowly, cautiously lifted the carpet. There in the middle of the room was a fresh cut in the floorboards. But it wasn't the same wood that had been there before. This was darker, newer. I pried it open. This time I didn't hear any whispering. I saw a face, a man's face, pale and gaunt, his eyes wide with terror. His mouth was open, but he didn't scream. His eyes locked with mine, and I could see something behind him. The space beneath the floor was dark, but there was something moving in it, something alive. That's when I realized the truth. Whatever was beneath the floor, whatever was whispering, wasn't trying to get out. It was waiting for me to open the trap door. It wanted me to look down, and I had just made a grave mistake. The man's face disappeared, and the whispers grew into screams. Screams that still haunt me to this day. I've always been a heavy sleeper, so when my new neighbor moved in next door, I didn't think much of it. The house next to mine had been vacant for months, and one day I noticed a moving truck parked outside. A woman in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, was unloading furniture by herself. She looked nice enough, a little older, maybe in need of company. Her name was Rachel, she told me, and I introduced myself before heading back to my own house. At first, everything seemed normal. She was quiet, kept to herself, and I didn't see her much. But after a couple of weeks, things started to feel strange. For one, I noticed she never left her house. Not during the day, not at night. I hadn't seen a car in her driveway for over a week. I thought maybe she was ill, or maybe just a recluse. It wasn't unusual for people to keep to themselves. But then, one night, I woke up to a sound, a soft tapping. It wasn't loud, just faint enough to pull me out of my sleep. I tried to ignore it, but it kept coming. A rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on the wall. I got up, walked to the window, and looked out. There in her yard was Rachel, standing completely still in the middle of the lawn, just staring at my window. Her face was expressionless, and her eyes, those cold, hollow eyes, were locked on mine. I froze. Something wasn't right. I pulled the curtains back and turned the lights off, hoping she wouldn't notice me staring back. I thought she'd leave, but she didn't. She just stood there in complete silence for what felt like hours. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and texted her. "Are you okay? I saw you outside." A few minutes later, she replied, "I'm fine. You saw me?" I texted back, "Yeah, just now. You were standing outside staring at my window." She didn't reply. I didn't hear from her again for days, but the tapping continued. Each night, it grew louder, until one night, I couldn't take it anymore. I went over to her house. The door was unlocked. I stepped inside and called out for her. No response. But as I moved through the house, I began to notice something strange. The house was perfectly immaculate, almost too perfect. No dust, no clutter. It felt like no one had ever lived there. When I reached the back of the house, I found her in the kitchen. But she wasn't just standing there. She was staring at the wall, her face twisted into an unnatural grin, her eyes wide open. And there on the floor beneath her was something that made my blood run cold. Written in dark red paint, no, it was blood. On the floor were the words, "They can see you too." I screamed and backed away, but Rachel's head snapped toward me with a sickening crack. Her neck was twisted at an impossible angle. She smiled again, and I could see her teeth, sharp, jagged. Then she whispered, "You weren't supposed to see them." The last thing I remember is her stepping toward me, her mouth open wide as the shadows behind her seemed to grow. And then, nothing. I woke up in my own bed, like nothing had happened, except the tapping is still there, every night. It's louder now, and it's coming from inside my own walls. And sometimes in the corner of my eye, I see Rachel, standing in the shadows, watching me. I've always been afraid of mirrors. I don't know why. It wasn't that I believed in ghost stories or anything, but there was something about seeing yourself, your own reflection, that unsettled me. So I avoided them. I didn't own one in my apartment. I'd get ready in the morning using my phone's camera, or just make do with whatever I could find. But one day, while I was cleaning out the closet, I found an old, full-length mirror buried under a pile of junk. I don't know where it came from. Maybe it was left behind by a previous tenant, or maybe I'd forgotten about it. But when I saw it, I felt this strange pull to place it against the wall, right across from the bed. It seemed like a good spot. I wasn't superstitious, so I figured there was no harm. The first night, I didn't think anything of it. But as I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, I kept seeing something in the reflection out of the corner of my eye. A figure. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. But then it happened again. The figure was tall, thin, and it wasn't me. It was standing there in the mirror, watching me. At first, I convinced myself it was just the shadows, or the way the light from the street lamp outside reflected in the glass. But the next night, it was there again. This time, it was closer. I could see its features more clearly. The skin was pale, almost sickly, and its eyes were wide open, black as pitch, like it was staring right into my soul. I couldn't take it. I covered the mirror with a blanket and didn't look at it again for weeks. But that's when things got worse. I woke up one morning to find that the blanket was gone.